My name is Hugh Edward Rozelle Jr., or Eddie Rozelle. And this is going to be a series of videos about where I live, Rozelle Town. And these videos will be of primary interest to Rozelles and Chandlers, and maybe a few Pattersons might enjoy them. And with some segments, I think, may be of interest to people who are interested in the history of Clay County. My father was Hugh Edward Rozelle. My grandfather was Edward Richard Rozelle. My great-grandfather was John Wesley Rozelle. And my great-great-grandfather was Enoch Richard Rozelle, the first Rozelle to live here on Hatchet Creek in Rozelle Town. And along with my son and daughter and my grandchildren, 7 generations of Rozelles have lived right here in the Rozelle Town community, and which is in today's western Clay County, Alabama. For over 165 years, this area has been known as Rozelle Town. Rozelle Town is part of the Hatchet Creek community, the wider Hatchet Creek community. And we are fortunate that 2 great books have been written about our community. The first is Horse and Buggy Days on Hatchet Creek, written by Mitchell B. Garrett, is published by the University of Alabama Press in 1957. And the second is Recollections, My Folks and Fields, written by the real Eddie Rozelle, Eddie B. Rozelle. It was republished in 2016 by cousin Eddie's daughter, Rebecca Rozelle Burt. Good. Both of these books would be of interest to a broader audience, because in addition to anecdotes about personalities in the community that might just be of interest to friends and family, they also tell what life was like, and they both do a good job of telling what life was like in Appalachian, Alabama in the 1890s and early 1900s. Now, another great reference to the early days and information that I found nowhere else that got me started was Hatchet Creek Presbyterian Church history, written by a Miss Watts. And that gives a real good account, brief account of the first settlers that came in. And now, if you really want to get down into the weeds, you might want to read my article that I wrote years ago. The Clay County Historical Society published this big, nice book, and they had members of different communities and members who had special interests to write articles. And I must have had too much time on my hands, because in addition to talking to every geezer in the communities, and I don't know if this was the late 1970s or the early 1980s, it didn't have a publication date in there. But in addition to talking to all the old heads, which I'm really glad I did, I learned a lot, I also went to the Mobile Public Library, the historical section, spent a lot of time at the archives in Montgomery, And the Alabama room at the public library in Anniston is really good too if you're into local Alabama history. And I also went to the Birmingham Public Library, the historical section. Now, in those days, you'd dig through books and find references, and then once you found something, you would make copies of it on a copy machine, and cost you $3 or $4. And then you had all that information you could bring home and go through it and pick out, like the Historical Quarterly, and then here's David Tate's coming to Alabama, and I think I had a lot of Hawkins. He came in, one of the first to come in and describe our area. And so that was really a lot of fun, and that was one of the first times I really got interested in historical research. And the reason I do it is just fun. And so those are some of my primary sources, and then I'll show you some other books later that also had references to our section. And so if you're interested in this community, you might want to go probably to the Ashland Public Library and see if, I'm sure they still have a copy of this old book. Then we need to redo it. Now, Rozelle Town, the location. Specifically, Rozelle Town is located at 33 degrees, 10 minutes, 58 seconds north latitude, and 86 degrees, 2 minutes, 58 seconds west. And our elevation is 838 feet above sea level. And Rozelle Town is squeezed between Talladega Mountain. If I could show you out this window, it's right over there. It was squeezed between the Talladega Mountains and Hatchet Creek. And prior to December the 18th, 1832, our area was part of the Muscogee Confederation. And I've always been interested in the Creek Indians, and so I did a lot of research specifically on that. And after that date, we became part of Talladega County after 1832. And then on December the 7th, 1866, we became part of Clay County, Alabama. Some of the early maps list our area as Hatchet or Hatchet Creek. But if there's a storm coming and you turn on the television and it flashes a location on the Weather Channel, you will see this. Okay, they spelled it wrong. They used an S instead of the Z in Rozelle. But every time I see that, it makes me smile that our name, Rozelle Town, Rozelle is on all the weather maps and U.S. geologic maps. And I hope they never change that. And the only thing I'd like for them to do is if they could just add Rozelle Town onto it. Okay, the first people, the first human inhabitation of our area, excuse me, was by the people of the Mississippian era and possibly even back to the woodland era. There's a field on our farm, in the southeastern corner of Section 20. Section 20 is the section that was settled by the Chandlers and Rozelles. Near the Big Bend, that's always been known as the Indian Field. Artifacts have always been found all along the creek where all the fields were, and especially in the Indian Field. That was one time a village there, a major village. In the 1970s, there was a mound there, and the mound was about 12 feet tall. It wasn't a big mound like a burial mound or a ceremonial mound. It could have been a burial mound, and it was about 100 feet in circumference. And a cousin was wanting to plant corn down there in the Indian Field. He had rented it from Ellen Catherine McClung, our cousin, and so he had a bulldozer down there clearing it up, and he said, well, just that old mound, just push it down. That'll give us a few more rows of corn. So at this time, I would like to formally apologize to those Native American spirits who possibly were buried there for disturbing your rest. I apologize on behalf of all the Rozelles, living and dead, for that family transgression. The good news is that a little further down the creek on my friend Dud Cobb's farm, there's still what is probably a mound, and it looks a little different from the one in the Indian Field. It's bigger and lower, but it could have been used to maybe store food or something during floods. And so it looks like an Indian mound, and there's no recorded evidence of it being used for anything else or why they would pile up dirt there later on, the settlers. Now, towards the end of the Mississippian era, in 1540, Hernando DeSoto made his historic march through Alabama. And I would like to propose a provocative possibility to you. When DeSoto left Tallahassee, or what we call Childersburg, in late September of that year, 1540, he followed the Coosa River south. Just stayed the easiest way to go instead of trying to go across all these hills. And he was finally stopped by a flooded feeder creek. And that creek was what we call today Hatchet Creek, or Pachoostahatchee, as they called it then. That's the name of the creek, and it's also the name of the people who lived along the creek further north. And while DeSoto was waiting for the creek to subside, he was enjoying the forced hospitality of the Ulebahale. I butchered that, I'm sure. The Ulebahale tribe that lived at the junction of Hatchet Creek, or Pachoostahatchee Creek, and the Coosa River. So while he was staying there, he couldn't go. They were living off the stored corn and stuff, I'm sure, of what the Indians had saved up to get them through the winter. A member of his expedition, Mansano, could be Mansano, a nobleman from Salamanca, Spain, had, according to Vega, he was with DeSoto, to Vega's account, he became despondent, depressed. And I'd like to think that this Spanish nobleman, seeing how DeSoto and his lieutenants treated these Native Americans. They'd go in, they'd capture the chief, then they would demand food, they would want bearers, people to carry the loads for them, and they wanted women to carry the loads for them, and they'd take the women off down the creek. So, you know, you got a lot of pissed off natives, I'm sure. So Mansano seeing all that, and I hope his sensibilities were assaulted enough that made him depressed. And according to Pickett's history, if you're interested in Alabama history, you got to have Pickett's. Mansano wandered away from the group. And according to Pickett, he was in search of muscadines or grapes. And breaking news. Now this is what I would like to propose to you Clay County historians and family members. Mansano could not travel south because Hatchet Creek was flooded. He couldn't go across the raging Coosa River to the west. He couldn't turn around and go back north because, you know, all the tribes where DeSoto had passed through, one lonely Spaniard that probably cut his head off after they tortured him to get back at him for what they had done to him. So Mansano's only way to wander away in search of grapes is to the east, northeast, following the path of least resistance, Hatchet Creek. So what I propose is that as he wandered north, he wouldn't have to go very far to start reaching the area that was farmed by the Pachoostahatchee, our tribe. And so I would like to think that it is a possibility that Mansano, being afraid to go too far out, because no telling what kind of tribes you'd run into, maybe some a little more angry, that he could have spent out his days walking up and down on these same fields here, eating the Three Sisters crops, the squash and corn and beans. That's the three crops that the Pachoostahatchee grew here, and that he may have just lived out his life here, maybe found him a beautiful Indian princess to live with. So is that true? Can we prove it? No, but it is a provocative possibility. And I believe he probably, if he wandered away, if he didn't just get killed that day, he had to have come up into our area, into what's today's Clay County. All right, let's skip ahead. By the time the first, mostly Scottish traders came into the land of the Upper Creek Confederation in the early to mid 1700s, the well-established Sockapatoy Trail, we're going to hear that over and over, ran through what would later become Rozelle Town. The Sockapatoy Trail is the main feeder route for Rozelle Town. The trail was squeezed between Hatchet Creek and the Talladega Mountain. It connected the many springs along the creek. The villages were always moving. As the soil was depleted in one area, those creeks had already cleared out fields to the north or the south, and they just moved their village to more productive land. And so this Sockapatoy Trail connected all of those past, present, and future villages. Their Pachoostahatchee, as different people came in, like Hawkins coming in for the government to see what was going on in this land that would soon be U.S. land. Sometimes they had villages, Pachoostahatchee, they said it is down below Brownsville. And there'd be different people said it's in different places all the way up to Kalita Valley. So the village moved. but sometimes it was right here in Rozelle Town. The Sockapatoy Trail started near what would later become Curry Station. It came south and crossed the McIntosh Trail. The McIntosh Trail was a big trail that came from Georgia. And then it came down through Rozelle Town, what would become Rozelle Town. And then it went and crossed another major Native American trail, the Weogufka to Hillaby Trail. And then it went on to Sockapatoy, which is near Kellyton, and then proceeded on, made its way down to Wetumpka. And Native Americans could go from Wetumpka to Talladega, up and down the Sockapatoy Trail. I mentioned the Weogufka to Hillaby Trail. It later became the Chapman Road that Andrew Jackson had improved, and he followed it on his way to the Battle of Horseshoe Bend. Later on, the Sockapatoy Trail became the Sockapatoy Road, and settlers coming from Georgia would come on the McIntosh Road, then come over, hit the Sockapatoy Road, and then come south to settle our area. And today, loosely following the old Sockapatoy Road is Clay County, County Road 7. Let's talk about the Pachoostahatchee tribe a little bit. I feel very close to that group. In Muscogee, the word Pachoose means wildcat or panther. Now, later on, somebody came through and he thought it comes from walnut, but most say that Pachoose comes from wildcat or panther. Hatchie means river or waterway. So the Pachoostahatchee tribe would translate as the Wildcat River tribe. And the natives and first visitors called the creek Pachoostahatchee or Wildcat Panther River. And you can find it that way on early maps. The settlers focused on the Hatchie part. And later on, Hatchie somehow morphed into Hatchet. And I don't think it was meant to be that way. And so we got Hatchet Creek, and we think a hatchet, but it really means waterway, Hatchie. And just north of the Pachoostahatchee tribe is the Waco Kai tribe up in Horns Valley. And to the east of us, across a few little hills here, is a group of villages that make up the Hillaby tribe. And sorry, that's poor planning. But if you're interested in the Hillaby tribe, my friend Don East wrote a wonderful book about the Hillaby tribes. And he also has a lot of history of our area in there. This is a great book. Don's dead now. Historical Analysis of the Creek Indian Hillaby Towns. Okay, maybe I'll get a little better organized. So, the Pachoostahatchee tribe first farmed these same fields that my family, the Chandlers and Roselle's, farmed. They were cleared by the Pachoostahatchee tribe, and later on, when the settlers came in, they just had to open them up. There's also, down along the creek, there's a field called the Apple Orchard Field. It's now a gravel pit. But when the settlers came, we planted our orchards up on the hill away from the creek. So that apple orchard field, when our family first came and saw those old apple trees, those were planted by the Native Americans, the Pachoostahatchee. Okay, in 1813, with the first Creek Indian War on the horizon, the Pachoostahatchee, along with their neighbors, the Waco-Kai and Hillaby tribes, were inclined towards peace because they were under the influence of the Scottish trader Robert Grierson that we'll talk about a little later. But the pressure of the encroaching settlers, who at the Treaty of New York, the government said, we will not let any settlers go down into the Creek Confederation, but they came anyway. We always break our promises to the Native Americans. Oops, we're not supposed to say that anymore. And threats from the Red Sticks, the Pachoostahatchee were finally induced to war. And members of this tribe here, the Pachoostahatchee, some of them were at the first battle of Burnt Corn Creek, and they were also at the Battle of Fort Mims, and later they were at Horseshoe Bend and conquered, defeated by old Andrew Jackson. So after that war of 1814 ended, the Pachoostahatchee warriors came back and tried to reestablish their life here. But the settlers are coming in, and it's just their time of peace is going to be cut really short. Okay. Okay. The settlers. The first settlers to own what is now our farm in Rozelle Town was William Bull, a squatter. He, along with Buffalo Dan Patterson, Theodore Levy, and Daniel Smith, came from the Cape Fear region of North Carolina around 1830, and before the Treaty of Cuseta was signed in 1832. So they came and settled on Muscogee land. They were Scotch Calvinists, and they were also loyal to the King of England during the American Revolution. And this information was gathered from Ms. Watts' history that we looked at before, and also from Captain Don East, Naval Captain Don East, his book on the early settlers and the Hillaby Indians. Now, Roy Patterson, a friend of mine who's deceased now, he was a history buff and interested in family history, and he told me a lot about the early Patterson history, along with his cousins, my friend Huron Patterson and Donald Patterson. They've told me stories. And there's also in Eddie Rozelle's book, there's stories about the early Pattersons. All right, William Bull was comparatively well off considering the time and the place. He owned 6 slaves, and he had 8 children to help him establish the farm and expand the fields that had already been cleared by the Pachoostahatchee. Imagine the fields up on the hill where Rozelle Town actually was. Those were not cleared by the Pachoostahatchee. The Indians cleared the fields down along the creek. William Bull built a 2-story house that was on our farm, the first nice, for that time, house. and it looks something like this. My back doorstep is a hearthstone from that old house. William Bull drug that rock to his house with a yoke of oxen, I imagine. Various early Chandlers and Rozelles all lived in that old original house until finally Frank and Charlotte Goodgang lived there until Aunt Charlotte died in 1921. And there'll be more about the Goodgang family later. In addition to farming, Bull improved the path across the mountain in the gap of the mountain. He widened the path so that a wagon could go across it, and he charged people to take his yoke of oxen and pull their wagon up that steep mountain road that he had improved. And so that was the fast way to get from here and east of here to Fort Williams and what would become Sylacauga, and keep them from having to go all the way around the mountain, around by Hollins and that way. And so today it's still known as Bull's Gap. And some people call our community Bull Gap Community. I like Rozelle Town. Andrew Jackson defeated the Muscogee in the First Creek Indian War of 1813 to 1814. And there was an uneasy peace when Bull came in 1830. Because the squatters were coming in here and everywhere, there was talk. The Indians were now talking about another uprising, which would become the Second Creek Indian War. On August the 18th, 1835, a disgruntled Creek by the name of Alum Harjo, or Crazy Fish, caught William Bull working down by the mineral springs. On his property that he had squatted on it, but then when he could, in 1832, he got a patent on the land, so he actually owned it then. Well, Alum Harjo didn't see it that way. Crazy Fish just said, well, this was my land, this was my father's land, my grandfather was born here, and now these guys are coming in here taking it over and building houses and telling me what to do. So Crazy Fish killed William Bull on this farm down at the Mineral Springs. He was captured and taken to Wetumpka, which at that time was the closest jail. Talladega County hadn't built one yet, to wait trial. On June the 3rd, 1836, Harjo, who could speak no English, was hung after being found guilty by a jury that could speak no Muscogee. So here's a trial where the guy can't defend himself or can't even say what happened. And while waiting to be hung there in Talladega near the court, no, it was east of the courthouse, a small group of Creek Indians started singing the Muscogee death song. And Harjo stood there, according to description, stoic, detached, and dignified. Here he's standing on the gallows, and he's just standing there looking around like he owned the place. And the crowd that had been jeering him fell silent. I think they got the feeling that, this is a class act. What are we doing? And when he was hung, there was silence. And he was buried in the middle of the McIntosh Road, east, going out of Talladega east, the McIntosh Road, where the Highland Road, which best I can figure, that's a little road that goes up to where the hospital is today. So if we could find where the old Highland Road across the McIntosh Road, we could find where Crazy Fish was buried. And they say for years, the children and a lot of the adults thought that place was haunted, and they refused to go there at night. Okay, that's the end of this section. Stay tuned.